everybody, and even if you don't have a body. I'm Layman Pascal on the Integral Stage, and a little while ago, as part of our ongoing series of discussions with John Vervaeke on the future of religion, Bruce Alderman and I had a talk with John about so-called subtle energies and subtle bodies. That's an area that I love to explore from a post-metaphysical, integrative, meta-modern, or coherent pluralist perspective. The phenomenology of subtle energy plays a large role in how I relate to the world, and it converges nicely with my general concern for what I'm calling meta-shamanism, the need to affirm and explore, reimagine, diversify, empower, and study variants of both traditional and instinctive shamanic potential for the age of the increasingly weird meta-crisis in the global village. So I was intrigued to hear John's subsequent talk with Robin Hummel about shamanism and subtle energy, and naturally invited him on the stage. Robin is a shamanic practitioner and researcher, a student of Jungian psychology versed in some of the new cognitive science, and in particular, he's exploring the archaic healing and transformative practices of the proto-indo-european shamanic lineage. Hi, Robin.
Hey,
Um, yeah, how
yeah.
old were you when you first got consciously interested in shamanic practice?
Consciously, how old was I? Well, that was like actually more like consciously regarding the shamanic practice. That would be, I guess, like three years ago or so. It was, yes. But it was like more before that into more of the Jungian psychological lens, shadow work, anima work, these kind of things, and different like more like mystery school related things, the ancient pagan mystery schools, and been looking into that, and that's kind of where everything kind of started. But then the interesting thing about how I kind of like got interested in shamanism is I had a dream about it, and I followed it. I was just like, okay, it's kind of part of my own journey of, I guess, individuation, you could say. To yeah, so it was kind of part of it.
What was the dream?
The dream was me. Well, I didn't have any like shaman drum, but it was the dream was about me painting a shaman drum and like putting it together, and so that kind of started the whole thing. So I started to look into it more and more. I already knew some stuff about it, but that's kind of how it started to get a little bit more, I guess, practical than theoretical, because I had looked something into it beforehand, but
It seems like a lot of people today are drawn to the entheogenic and psychedelic plant medicines when they're interested in shamanism, but you put
yeah,
a lot of work into sound and rhythm and transformational journeys with drumming. What do
yeah.
you find works really well for you with drums, and what is your drumming practice? Could you describe some of that for us?
What works well with drums? Uh, I do have to say, like with regarding with drums, that very much for me, it's just I don't know. I'm not into like the psychedelic stuff, so it's kind of why I guess the drum was speaking more towards me. But I think it's also just partly because of the shamans that I talk to. They use drums instead of psychedelic substances. So that's kind of like how that kind of then also evolved. But to be honest, like I've always had something for drums already from the beginning. Like as a young kid already. So I already had something like a connection with rhythm and drumming and these kind of techniques. So it just kind of felt natural. And for me, with the drumming, it's the drumming for me. It's really the it's when you use it, it's not just like, the beat of the drum, but it's very much that you are participating in it. It's not as easy as at first, than just listening to a recording, like how some of the core shamanic practitioners do initially. But for me, I just started off right at the bat, just using the drum and like trying to go into trance that way. But it's just, yeah, for me, it's just the connection to the body that's the most important factor in that it's very participatory and it pushes you very much into this like present moment awareness. And I very much like the dancing, chanting aspect that I do, in my practice also. I really much like that as well about it, because it's very focused on cultivating this sense of flow state, this sense of, yeah, very much that kind of sense.
You think it's important for a person's spiritual and psychological practice to be rooted in body and nature? Because there are a lot of traditions that don't focus on that very much.
Well, it depends on, what you really mean regarding that. It is true regarding, different traditions having different kind of focus, but I would say, and then but that's kind of like, my own bias from where I'm coming from, really. But I would say it's very much important to have that connection to nature, to the natural world, because it's not just this connection to the natural world, but it's also, this connection to ourselves as well, to, from a Jungian lens, like our instinctive nature that we're, like tapping into. And similarly with the spirit guides, the spirit helpers, and also some of the other rituals that I do, it's very much linked to nature, towards these different animal archetypes, you could call them. And it taps into, it very much taps into the transformational within the psyche, the transformational potential that's there. And I think that's,
I guess
yeah.
one argument would be that that's just your personal bias, but another argument would be that we're at a point in history where the human civilization is having a lot of problems with how it relates to nature and other species.
That is
And we
true.
very much need our spirituality to be focused on the ecosystem at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the, the long-term trend, going from the Neolithic, through all the way through to, what I guess they could be called like the Piscean age. There seems to be very much a trend from all the way from the beginning of civilization, slowly, like, moving away further and further from nature, to the point where this transition between agriculture and cities, where, you can see in like different spirits, for instance, like the Roman Lares spirits, like, they used to be spirits of place connected to nature, but then they became spirits of city districts and such places. And there's a slow movement away from that kind of connection with nature that it originally had, more and more towards, city life, more towards, the technological, even like now you could say in the modern age. And it's moving, it's this direction away from it. But then at the same time, I do feel that, moving away from that, it might lose a lot of its original connection, its original, the deeper, like embedded meaning in it, if it gets more and more, disconnected from its original base. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing about whether we treat shamanism as one path among many paths that we have available to us now, or whether we treat it as sort of the source of all the paths and maybe even the normal form of human self-development practice, because it predominated for hundreds of thousands of years, and these other paths have existed for only a few thousand years. When you think about it, do you think about it as one option among many, or do you think about it as sort of the source and the basic thing that works underneath all the paths?
Well, when it comes to that, I guess the real basis, what also the shamans I talked to would say would be animism, and then there's that what they see as shamanism, in Asia, for instance, that they like identify as shamanism that has a particular kind of set of structure and framework. But then again, if you really look at it, there in the mystery schools, there's a different type of like trance work with spirits and possession also happening, even though it's a different framework. But I do think that in the original sense, if you trace it back more towards the Neolithic and the cave rituals, for instance, as well, if you go more back towards that, it becomes very shamanic in that sense. I wouldn't call it exactly shamanism in the way of what it is in Asia, for instance, right now, or other cultures, but it's cultural specific. But I do think that there is a core element there that is shamanic, that's present within all these different cultures. But I do think that that over time, a lot of traditions have lost, the connection to that underlying base. It's become more focused on the I guess you could say, certain traditions have become very focused on the higher spiritual plane, casting what they see as the lower world as demonic and fallen, where there is no, not exactly such a. There's more nuance within the shamanic tradition regarding that, generally speaking, in the more ancient sense. I mean, there's in some traditions a Buddhist influence for sure. And that also can shape how in particular lineages it's viewed, but generally there's way more nuance within shamanism than in a lot of the later traditions. There seems to be and I think I do think it's very important to to understand the spiritual world in this lens of nuance, because so one does not end up throwing away the baby with the bathwater regarding certain aspects, because a lot of these things also are connected to not only aspects of nature but also aspects of our own true nature, and our own wholeness as well.
It's interesting to think about nuance being lost over time and through the traditions. When you think of that side by side with this sense that we've been developing and growing and maturing as a species, how do you think about the difference between, maybe we've advanced or grown up from our primitive beginnings versus maybe we've left behind a lot of sophistication that they used to have, and we might even be less wise in many respects than they were?
I think when it comes to that, and I don't know, I kind of feel that in a way we've evolved in a more material sense, and there has been a lot of progress. I would call it knowledge. There's been a lot of progress of knowledge, but maybe not so of wisdom to some degree. But the thing is that if you look at it throughout history, the different cultures, like in Egypt and in Rome and Greece and and also for instance even in in older cultures as well, there is this there is this slow loss there, continuously within all of these different civilizations. There is this loss of particular knowledge that, or well, really, maybe I should say it better, a particular wisdom that gets lost over time. And most of the time it's it's actually just that people forgot like what the original meaning of it is. They lost that connection to it, and can see it, for instance, with like a particular instance that I know about. It's not shamanism, but it's a good like example of losing wisdom would be with Rome, for instance. They used to have these particular rituals that they used to do in the ancient, kingdom era, where later at the time of the emperors, they didn't do it anymore. They didn't do these rituals anymore, but they were an important part of well, I guess from a spiritual lens, like spiritual maturation of the individual. But they stopped doing these because it started to just become more and more a symbolic thing, where in the end it was just like, yeah, like a priest now says you're now mature, congratulations. But it's like, but it misses the entire symbolic aspect and the ritualistic aspect of these of these rituals, which contains the wisdom. And similarly, I do feel that over time we, as humanity, not out of our own fault, like we didn't do it on purpose, but we just forgot like what it meant, or like why is this important. But I do think we can, through like anthropology, but also through looking at different cultures, what they like the wisdom that's still there, and trying to figure out from the looking at these ancient cultures, we can put this wisdom back together, and we can start to reassemble it and like figure out like, okay, well, why did they do these rituals? Like, what's the symbolic meaning for it, and how does this affect the psyche? How does this affect our psychology? And with this, what does this do for the individual spiritual development?
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of potential to combine lineages that are reasonably unbroken in passing wisdom down.
Yeah.
Cultures that have a lot of fragments that are left over that could lead to a reconstruction of the ancient methods. And then also the experiences of people today in shamanic experience and shamanic settings. If those things come together, we might be able to get a pretty good idea of what was going on in the archaic approach.
I do think so. It's just I do feel like very much just about putting all these puzzle pieces together. But it's quite the task, very much. I do know like of one particular tradition that's been like a while ago, like of interest. Well, two actually that are very much of interest for for me lately, has been. Originally, it's the Manchu tradition in Ninguta, China. There's a very unbroken line there from the Neolithic till now regarding their traditions. That's been very interesting. And then you also have the Bon tradition as well in Tibet.
What do you think what are some of the main differences between Asian shamanism and Indo-European shamanism?
The main difference, I would say, is just the framework and like the focus of it. Within the Asian shamanism, you have the shaman who does the healing in a more it's a communal task, like that the shaman does, but then it's more he helps in individuals or like a family, and it's more like he either travels towards people, or people come towards the shaman, and it's more very much like a role that the shaman performs, where more, if you look at the Indo-European traditions in the ancient sense, it's more, you could call it like more democratized shamanism. It's more it's like communal. The role isn't particular to just a singular individual. It's more spread, even though there are for sure, like, you could call them professionals in some sense. the priests or these figures that perform such roles, but it is generally more a kind of ritual where people are initiated into it. They partake in the ritual as a group, and then they, and that's, and I'm speaking here from the ancient, traditional sense, from way in the early pagan days regarding this. But that's how they seem to have done that. It's very much more initiatory, much more about a shared ritual where, in the Asiatic sense, it's more the role of the shaman. They are trained by an elder shaman. There's a lineage. There's particular, they all have their own spiritual framework, their own mythology, obviously. But it's different. It's different. And if we would want to bring the actual ancient traditions back in the Indo-European sense, it would be something more. If one would want to stay true to that essence of how they like how they used to do it in that sense, it would very much more be about a communal shared ritual where everyone partakes in the trance state, in this even like psychedelic experience, because they used to actually use psychedelic substances, such as like there's a particular fungus that grew on barley that they used, or mushrooms and such. So it's very much different.
Your sense is that in the Asian framework, it's more likely that there's like a job in the village of being shaman, and that person has experience and then provides services to the community. And in the Indo-European lineage, that person is more like the person whose job it is to help everyone else also have shamanic experience.
Basically, that seems to be the main the main difference regarding that.
I'm interested in the difference in intensity of experience, right? You're talking about, you can eat a bit of a fungus off barley, and it's uncertain how intense the experience is for people, because we have access to very powerful psychedelics now. And for some people who are interested in shamanism, they think of it as the ability to go into very intense altered states. But drumming and dancing, or a little bit of sacred tobacco is the other route. Like some people are interested in a shamanic state that's just a little bit off of normal, and some people are interested in one that's very far from normal. How do you think about the difference between those two?
The difference. Well, I mean, I would kind of, use in that sense, generally the analogy that this UK shaman that I know, that's been like initiated in the Mongolian tradition, for instance, how he would talk about it. It's very much, you can either stand at the shore of the beach, you're not that much into trance, or you can plunge way in the depths of the ocean. It just depends. It's like similarly, even with drumming, there's different ranges of how deep you go into the trance state, how deep you go into it. It's not the same all the time. So, and like for sure, there's like substances out there that would have quite an immense impact nowadays. And but I don't really know too much about those substances. I just know that they can have quite an impact, from the little that I have heard from some people that I know that are more into those kind of substances.
About imagination. How would you say the shamanic use of imagination differs from the ordinary human use of imagination?
I would say regarding imagination, very much that it's more an act of I guess you could call it communion, where it's very much not it's not like ego consciousness trying to like control whatever is being imagined or visualized. It's more about letting letting it arise on its own, and to have a relationship with it. With it's very much focused on building. Also with the spirits, it's about a relationship with the spirits. It's about a relationship with. It's very much not about either this thing or that thing, but it's very much about the relationship between. And it's about, I guess, yeah, and it's not about like either the subjective or the objective. It's that what's in between. It's about, it's very much, about the Bardo state, you could call it. But it's just, yeah, but relationship is very, very important in that, and it's a very important factor. And it's from a Jungian lens, you could see it like that. Ego consciousness and the unconscious has built this relationship to each other, where one does, ego consciousness doesn't try to impose something upon the unconscious, like this is. It's like, yeah, you can have an intent, but then after having that intent and what you want to do, there's this need for, to listen to the unconscious and let those things arise. Similarly with the shamans, they listen to the spirits, they listen to what arises and act accordingly. And it's an act of surrender very much.
What do you think of when you say a word like spirits?
What do I think of when I say a word like
Yeah,
spirits?
what does that word mean to you?
I mean, regarding spirits, I
Well,
would
you
very
just
much.
mentioned listening to the spirits, and listening to the spirits is something that maybe you and I are familiar with, but probably a lot of people have no idea what a sentence like that means.
Well, I would say maybe to frame it into, I guess, a more, Jungian framework that maybe some people are more familiar with. I guess because there's this distinction between, I guess, certain spirits. In that sense, we could like the mind-born spirits that are from a Jungian lens and the personal unconscious. They're more in the realm of complexes, how the Jungians would talk about it. But then there's like the deities and the helper spirits and the other spiritual beings that are more in the type in the lens of like archetypes. And when I talk about spirits, I'm talking about the archetypal energies that are inherent in the world, and what Jung would call the collective unconscious. And it's very much about tapping into that. And in a way, the line gets because the shamans I talk to that for instance, the UK one who knows also Jungian psychology, he talks about the fact that the line is very blurry at times, especially in the beginning of what you're working with, like if it's mind-born or world-born, or like if it's like archetypal or just very like personal. But over time, you learn more about it. But it's very much, I would say like the actual spirits in that sense would be very archetypal. So from a Jungian lens, like archetypes, and I would say, it's represented. It's kind of within us in a way, but it's also within the world itself, and it's very much connected to I guess, life itself, the life force and vitality of the world.
When we were talking about Asian and Indo-European traditions, we were talking a little bit about kind of the what the shaman has to offer to the rest of the society, right? It might be sort of special abilities, it might be healing, it might be the invitation to go into different kinds of experience. But on the flip side, there's a question of what the shamans need from the rest of society in order to be supported, in order to be encouraged. What do you think? Like, if you, what do shamans need from society? Like, what would be required for there to be a healthy, robust kind of shamanism in our own civilization?
Well, what I do know from the Asian shamans, it's very much about, well, a lot of the people that are there within these communities, they are already to different degrees embedded in the, you could say, the mythological framework of the shamanic practice that's there. So it's very much an important factor in that. Next to that, I mean, well, yes, they ask some money for it, and they for their services and stuff like that. But I do think the most important one right now for the West would be the mythological framework. So the language which to speak, the symbolic language, and for, I guess, more people to have this like symbolic understanding of things, because that would really help in overall with regarding the entire practice. I would think also for the shaman, because it's important to have that shared language going on. So there's like it's like it would really much help regarding that, to have that understanding being there, even though technically it doesn't have to, because you can speak directly to, I guess, from a Jungian lens, you could say the unconscious. But I do think it would make it easier for shamans to do their work. And I would feel based on from what I know regarding the Asian shamans, it's also makes things more clear for people what they're talking about, because then someone can come with a particular issue, like they're for instance, one example, there was like one man who came to a shaman who was like, oh, I'm being plagued by a bokshi, which is like their term for like a witch. And so then the shaman knew what to do. There's this communication possible, even though I guess the shaman can't figure it out on their own too. But I do think it would very much help to have that. And I guess for more people to be to some degree initiated into it, because in these cultures, people, they pray to these different deities, they interact with the spirits, and there's this culture of interaction there with the natural world, with the spirits. And it grows out of that. If that like soil, that spiritual soil isn't there, it's very difficult to embed like a shaman in that. It's like trying to take a full-grown plant and put it on concrete, but there is no soil.
So for a robust shamanic culture to flourish, the background civilization has to have a lot more experience of the world as a symbolic landscape.
Yeah.
Not all shamans are healers, but there's a strong idea that you can bring some healing to others if you've been able to heal yourself. And very often, right, that's sort of primitive psychotherapy in a way, but it goes beyond that as well in terms of transforming your inner fragmentation or neuroses or hypersensitivity or any number of different things. What's your own experience been of healing through shamanic practices?
Quite transformation, I would say. I've done a lot of work regarding soul retrieval, and it's been very much regarding my practice, kind of the main focus. And I don't know like how to even put it, but I guess there's a lot of like behavioral changes and like psychological changes that occur through these shamanic journeys that I have done, where I've been facing.
When you say soul retrieval, is that like one soul that's been lost and is found again, or is that the gathering together of many parts of a soul so that they can be integrated?
Many parts. it's because the soul and the shamanic context is can be fragmented. So there's many aspects of a person's soul and being. So you can kind of see it like if you would envision the soul as, I don't know, I guess like this energetic, I don't know, version of yourself, just for the sake of metaphor. It's not like that, but it's just for the sake of metaphor. And something traumatic happens, for instance, here in my arm, then or like psychologically in some way, then a particular part, let's say like just for metaphor's sake, it's connected to my arm, then this part gets disconnected, so I lose this like access to this particular part of myself. And then the goal of the soul retrieval is to reestablish this relationship and connection to this part, to put this part back, so I can become like a more functional human being again. And that's very much a big part of that. And then there's the negative, like there can be negative spirits involved that like keep that part locked away, and there's a sense of negotiation sometimes, or fighting, spiritual battle, or otherwise. But it doesn't end with just that. Even if the soul part is retrieved, this fragmented part of the self that gets retrieved, that had been broken off due to trauma, there's still a need to continue to work on that. And in the shamanic context, there's particular either symbolism involved. You can think of particular like dolls that they make, like out of wood or something, or other materials, or a particular ritual that the person has to do, or they have to come back to the shaman for further rituals as well. So it depends.
Do you think there are aspects of the psyche that can be transformed only by enacting it in the external world, as opposed to merely treating it psychologically? Like when you talk about making dolls and things like that, that's a way of enacting your own psychological needs in objects and spaces in the world, as opposed to merely going to a room where you speak with a therapist and you go through the journey only as a internal and verbal experience.
I think, like part of it from a Jungian lens would be, can be classified as kind of like an externalization, yes, of the, what's internal externally. And I've done such rituals as well. And they are powerful due to the symbolic nature of it. So it's speaking to the symbolism, and with it to the unconscious, and that creates, it's like an externalization of an internal struggle or conflict that then can be resolved in this manner. But then there's also another aspect regarding that as well, that coming back to, for instance, with the drumming and the dancing, it's for instance, when it comes to trauma, for instance, it also helps in a psychological lens to, like if someone is, stuck in this like trauma, in trauma, or like, they went through that, they can also, from a psychological lens, be stuck in like the freeze response, for instance, for a very long time. So the movement of the body, the rhythm that is repetitive, also can, in that sense, just next to all of the benefits of like, the trance work itself, can help the individual already to connect more with the body and get themselves out of this freeze response that one just doesn't get out of if one would only talk about it verbally, because that's a very like, it has to do with the body mind connection. It has to do with the body itself, and it is something that we cannot like rationalize our way out of, because it's very much about the very ancient parts of the brain that go beyond just mere thinking, verbalizing, and can only be really accessed through, like stimulating the vagus nerve to stimulate this the body in this particular way through this rhythmic movement that one does to get oneself out of this state. And it's also important to know from what I've come to understand from a psychological lens, that it's important for the person to be out of this like freeze response state for the integration of the soul part to even be able to occur, because you need to be able to process it, because there's also emotions involved. Like if you look at a lot of the like footage, for instance, from Asia about the shamans, and they treat a patient, there's a lot of emotions involved too. Like the patient starts crying, or like they start to shake, or otherwise have a reaction, and that's the body processing what's been connected to this fragmented piece of the soul that's being brought back. But, it's important that they're engaged in it, and it's an important part too about the shamanic rituals too. It's not just sitting on a chair, but you have to be engaged in it. You have to really participate in it for it to have like a good and strong effect.
Yeah, we mentioned Jung a few times, who was a student of Freud, but Wilhelm Reich was also a student of Freud, and he did a lot
Yeah.
of research on the way we suppress our breathing in order to prevent the eruption of the psychology and the emotions that we need to process and integrate into ourselves. What have you noticed about breathing processes, in shamanic healing and shamanic journeying?
Breathing processes. So how do you...
Well, I'm just curious about, two things. One is the
Yeah.
role of breathing in terms of entering into trance states, because when you're dancing or you're chanting, you're also modifying your breath, and that's helping your organism go into a different state. But
True.
also in terms of what you were talking about earlier of being able to really engage with the material that's coming up rather than just sitting there. How much of that is a pattern of breathing that allows your organism to be aroused and stimulated, as opposed to a pattern of breathing that kind of keeps you calm and together?
I mean, I have not actually thought much regarding, the breathing part regarding shamanism. I know about like Qigong and like general breathwork practices, and I do know that that this also, taps into the vagus nerve, and with that also, taps into it in a manner that brings up the repressed. But it has to do, in that sense, with that, it has to do with with going into this kind of fight or flight mode, to go into that, but then also to bring it back to a sense of calm. And it's but with Qigong, it's slightly different than breathwork practices. It depends, with Qigong, it's more about the rhythmic movements, but it's generally it's about bringing oneself out of the freeze response or the fight or flight response, to trigger oneself out of that, to get to this more rest and digest state where the processing is possible. But I do know from experience, at least from the shamanic practice that I've been doing, that generally it's very active with the dancing, the chanting, but also with the drumming. What the shamans in the Asian traditions do as well. It's very active. It's very exhausting, and can be. There are some cases with, for instance, rituals that they do to initiate a shaman that are very, I guess, very taxing. They go on and drumming for days, and so I don't go as extreme as that, but it can be very I guess taxing on the body. It can be, and pretty intense as well. Depends on what one experiences, because part of that with the shamanic journeys too is like when I go into it, if you like that, what you encounter, for instance, in these journeys can very much trigger something within yourself as well. Like, emotions coming up or whatever you experience or see can really trigger a strong emotional response as well. So that's very much part of it as well.
This is just an aside, really. I'm also very interested in the role that breath might have in putting us into communication with parts of nature. Because I know that some people find that, like,
Yeah.
if you're on a mountain or if you're in ice water or things like that, it can, if you allow it, change your body's breath rhythm. And it might be that our ancestors were able to adapt to different environments because they allowed those environments to alter their breathing and then alter the way their body was functioning.
Hmm.
But another thing that comes up for me is, I've heard you use the term Windhorse, and I
Yeah.
know that's shared by a couple of different cultures, but Windhorse seems like it has these two different aspects. And one is very much related to the breath, to prana, to the notion that there is a
Yeah.
kind of an energy in our breathing in the air. And then the other aspect of it is sort of the aspect of consciousness and the ability of consciousness to ride on thoughts and feelings and perceptions and experiences.
Hmm.
What when you think of Windhorse, what do you think of? What do you mean when you try to get across with the idea of Windhorse?
What I want to get across with regarding Windhorse, I mean, in some sense, Windhorse, yes, is linked to the breath, and from and very much, the idea is that through the breath is also like how we, like connect not only to the world but also connect like the different parts within ourselves together. The spirit and the spiritual and the physical gets connected through the breath in that sense. But it's also Windhorse is a very it's also very much about the transformation of negative into positive, like negative behaviors into positive behaviors. And it's also very much a process of, I would say, transformation, transmutation, and integration, and very much about the cultivation of not just vitality but also about awareness. The awareness of all that we are. So it's very much linked towards that, and it's also often represented in mandalas, also in the center as the symbol of the soul as well.
What is the role of Windhorse in transforming negative behavior into positive behavior? How does that work?
When it comes to the role in it regarding that, I don't think it's the growing awareness, but it's very much like, you can see it in terms of mindfulness that's connected to it, because a lot of the practices can be very much classified as very much like mindfulness practices. But I think regarding that also with practices such as Qigong, there's also this connection to vitality in the body as well. So it's very much about strengthening this like mind body connection. So internally within in the brain, but also within the brain, all these different parts of the brain together to strengthen that and to keep working on that, so that you start to cultivate this sense of awareness and mindfulness. So you start to become more aware of these patterns within yourself, become more mindful of them. And through this sense of mindfulness, you can then start to slowly, like change these patterns of behavior. And I would say from a Jungian lens, it's regarding the vitality part. It's also, like with the body, it's also connecting us to more of our instinctual nature as well. To, like this
There's,
deeper embedding.
yeah. I was thinking about
Yeah.
different kinds of empowerments and blessings, right? There's a human version of that where ritual with people, or the presence of an individual, or even their
Yeah.
conscious intention can transmit empowerment. But there's also an ecological, there's a natural component where certain places, certain parts of nature seem to be able to offer us a blessing of some kind. When you're looking for a good spot, a power spot, a charged aspect of nature, what are the signs you look for? How would you decide that this was a really good spot or a good tree or a good river to receive something from?
Well, first, really, I started off with there's like close to where I live, there's a Sami stone, a sacred stone, and most of the time I'm very close to the sacred stone and the bog that is there, and I'm aware because of that stone that it's sacred ground. So that's kind of like how I identified it. Otherwise, I guess I listen to the spirits and they tell me where to go, what's a good spot. Something that like and it very like differs like in different journeys, like different spots or different locations and different times even, or end up being important in like the, I guess, the symbolism of the entire journey. So there's a lot that comes regarding that as well. But I guess in the shamanic traditions in Asia, they would go, to particular sacred sites most of the time, and like mountains, but also different sacred sites, such as the particular shrines or stones with, for instance, prayer flags. For instance, in Mongolia, I think it's called an ovo. I think, if I'm not mispronouncing it, but yeah, and these are like old sacred sites that they have been using for a very, very long time. So they use these particular spots, and similarly, in here in Finland, I'm using the old remainders of the Sami culture, kind of their power spots, you could call it, for the practice.
Is the Sami culture very prominent? Like when you were growing up there, is there a sense that it's still somehow vibrant, or that people know about what its power spots are, or is it more of a distant memory?
Well, I originally came from the Netherlands and not from Finland. So I didn't really grow up with it, but I do know that mainly it's in northern Finland, where the Sami still are, and there's still some remnants there, but a little bit more south where I am, where there are still some of the sacred stones there. It's very a distant memory, and I only know about it because I've looked into these sacred stones and I know the significance of them. But generally speaking, a lot of people would not really know the significance of either these stones, the bogs, or the particular caves that they used.
Yeah,
It's
I live
very
where I live.
yeah.
There are a lot of Finnish people, and I've spent some time in Norway, where a bunch of my ancestors are from. And in both cases, I find very little public awareness of the older lineages
Yeah.
in those places.
Yeah, no, that's the case here as well. It's very there's there were some shamans in Finland that I had some contact with, and they know about such spots, but generally the general public, no, they would not know about that. They don't really know much about it. Very little about like the about particular spirits too. Like there's some awareness of that in Finland, regarding the mythology and the spirits that are here, but that's a bit stronger. But the actual deeper layers, maybe not as much anymore. but it's
Do
just
you have
the times.
much awareness or interest in the like American indigenous traditions or the South Pacific, or are you mostly focused on the European and Asian lineages?
Um, European and Asian, really mostly. I do read some like articles that are from like the Sacred Hoop magazine from this one shaman who works together with some core shamans and like Harner and such. But like there's some like Native American traditions that sometimes are featured in there, but that's kind of the most that I really learn about it. There was something about like a Lakota tradition, for instance, and such, but that's very rare that I really look into these things deeply. It's more like Indo-European and the Asian shamanic traditions. And I think it's mostly just because, well, I mean, I'm interested in the drum. The Indo-Europeans also use their own forms of drums and other instruments as well. And yeah, my main focus has been to try to revive some of these ancient rituals. So hence my focus has been mostly there.
I'm interested in the role that gender plays or doesn't play in
Yeah,
these traditions, because on the one hand, we could say, you know, where the culture has a strong division of gender roles, then you kind of get male and
yeah,
female versions. And when the culture doesn't have that strong division, they kind of do the same thing. But on the other hand, there's neurological differences and physical differences, and men and women have different kinds of experiences. We often associate women with nature and the earth a little bit more. They go through menstrual cycles. So there are some structural differences, and then there are some cultural differences or non differences. How do you
yeah.
think about men and women in shamanic traditions?
When it comes to men and women in shamanic traditions, I know from the Asiatic lineages, some of them, from what I know about, there can be a difference in that the women are not allowed to do particular things, and vice versa, the men at times. So there's like a separation of that of like the functions that they can play, like what kind of people they can do the service for, or what kind of ritual they can do, and what kind of ritual they can't do, or what spirit they can work with, and vice versa. But it's like, but it differs. It's very like depending on the culture and the lineage, and with some, it's not like separated on gender, but separated on the type of shaman that they are. Because, for instance, in Mongolia, you have the white shaman and the black shaman, and then you have the yellow shaman. That's the one that's more connected to Buddhism as well. And there's a difference there where the black shaman can't go to the upper world and the white shaman can't interact with the spirits from the underworld. And you have to go to these different shamans for different things. But that's a very cultural thing.
There's been some modern cultures, the
Yeah,
Soviet Union comes to my mind, that would go to schools and pick out children for certain things. Like, we want to win Olympic gold medals, so we're looking for children that might make good runners or good swimmers or something like that to train them to do that task. If you were going through the schools, or if you were looking at children looking for who might be a good shaman, what would you look for? What would be the signs that would indicate that this or that child might have strong potential?
I would very much say, and I want to then frame it in a Western framework. I would say, it would have to be someone who has a strong connection generally to the unconscious, someone who maybe has been forced inward or went inward more and has a deeper connection to like, yeah, the unconscious, and with more maybe to some degree nature as well. It's more uh, because very much with the shamans, first, it's you deal with the mind-born spirits, and you deal with that, and then you finally get to the point where you can work with the world-born ones. But it very much seems to be that that's at least one thing. But then it's also kind of about like a kind of an attitude too, because you can't be yeah, I don't know. It's very much about an attitude too. It's like you have to be willing to face the unknown. You have to be willing to face, I guess, things most people would find very scary, disturbing, or otherwise terrifying, because it can be. It's not all like rainbows and butterflies. It's not all. Yeah, there's bad spirits, there's bad stuff out there, and it's very much the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to shamanism. It's the full spectrum experience of life itself, and you need to really have that inner core there to be able to really withstand that. And that's also what in the shamanic cultures they're looking for. That's why these initiation rituals are as tough as they are, because you really need to be I guess courage, like an immense amount of courage is needed to be able to do this kind of work, and also a sense of, I guess, mindfulness, or like you need to be perceptive, you need to be not rash, you need to really be able to listen to the spirit, you need to really be there's a real sense of kind of wisdom that needs to be cultivated as well. But that's kind of also part in the the initiation of the shaman. But it's very important to have that, because you can't just run off and do something. It's a balancing of courage and wisdom, and being perceptive, and also having the ability to not be too fixated, because not everything is as it seems. Not all spirits are as they seem. Not all situations you encounter as a shaman are what they seem either. It's because sometimes particular situation you encounter, you can be like, oh, I need to do this to it, but it's always slightly different. There's always a catch. There's always like something about it. You need to really be fine with the unknown, fine with being somewhat flexible regarding the spirits in some way. There's the structure, yes, but there needs to be some adaptability there, that you I guess a trickster like quality, that you can like you can like look at it from different angles, because it's very needed, because you can otherwise get very stuck sometimes, or you try to resolve something and yeah, you can't be like hard-headed or like too hard-headed about that. Like you can't be just like a ram or a goat trying to just push your way through either in the spirit world. That doesn't go well either. So there's a real like flexibility there needed too. And it's, I guess, maybe why it's rare for regarding like the actual shamans to find such a individual that has these kind of qualities. But it can also be cultivated, I would probably think as well, that kind of like mentality, because it's very much an attitude to have.
Where is your research going next? What are you looking forward to exploring more about shamanism?
Well, I've been looking a little bit more into the Bon tradition recently, and mostly lately I've been looking actually more into like the more ancient reconstructed proto-indo-european traditions, to shed a little bit more to try to shed more light onto the different indo-european traditions. particularly I guess the Koreos tradition has been for a long time of great interest, and been really trying to bring the shamanic and Jungian lens with like a modern psychological lens together. That's really been my focus lately, to create like that kind of like bridge, at least for myself and maybe for others too, and to try to make it a bit more, I guess, understandable from a Western lens, like what's exactly like, what we're here trying to do.
Are you do you pay attention to the reconstruction of the Proto-Indo-European languages in order to use that as a lens to see into what their practice and experience was like?
To some degree, yes, but I mostly tend to look at like the mythological layers, mostly like the reconstructed mythological figures and deities, and then try to use that, and then I go immediately back towards the Indo-European deities, and I'm starting to like and also spirits, trying to understand the connections between them, these different fragments, and to try to hold them all together as these different cultures that they are, and try to figure out what are like what are these different elements, and how can me understanding this maybe help in understanding other aspects of these different cultures, because they originally came from this proto-Indo-European culture. So I'm trying to look at all these different cultures to understand this. It's, for instance, with like the Korean tradition, they had these dances and drumming involved in these traditions as well, with the Ulferdnar, but also the Koribantes, and with these other warrior traditions linked to like Apollo and Mars as well. It's initiatory traditions, or with the Arctea from Artemis, for instance. And I've been looking at that, and trying to like put that more and more together to have an understanding of that, to understand like also with the mystery schools, to understand like where did all of this come from, like how just what they these rituals, what they do, because there's an influence from all these different cultures on each other, and it comes from an earlier base, and I'm trying to really find the commonalities with that, and to try to see like, okay, so I have all of this knowledge from the ancient these ancient cultures, then I want to bring it together with like modern insights, and then also look at the Asian shamanic traditions and what they do, what works, and then try to see like what can I then understand, and regarding the Indo-European traditions, and like how can I try to at least in some way reconstruct something and bring something back to life. And I use like Jungian psychology also with it, to look at the symbolism and the symbolic meaning of it, and try to tie that back into modern psychology, and to really like try to understand like what does it psychologically, and then like how can we tap into that to create that again, that kind of effect, what they were trying to describe in these kind of texts. For instance, the mystery schools, especially from some of the information that I've been able to gather, there's like it's like, yeah, but it depends. I mean, the Mithraic mysteries, they apparently, from what I've been able to put together from a lot of the research, they seem to have done a lot of breathwork rituals. That seemed to be the main thing that they were doing, meditating and breathwork in their caves, but like and other rituals. But but I'm trying to like put it together. But with the choreos, it's with the drumming, especially, that I'm interested in, like how can I connect? Is there a connection with the shamanic practice in Asia in some sense, and how do what are they, what were they trying to do?
Have you paid much attention to Göbekli Tepe and some of these really old sacred sites that are being unearthed in
Yes.
Turkey?
No, I have.
And what do you find most interesting about those?
The most interesting regarding those would be I've been looking into like the into the more like ritualistic aspects that are, and it's very much like hypotheses of different people and of like what probably happened there. And the most interesting thing regarding that is like one hypothesis that I think has a good potential of being true, which would be the rituals connected to like the heroes gamos, this coming together of the masculine and feminine symbolically, and heaven and earth, and there's that going on with that, and that's been the most interesting part regarding that, and to look at the older traditions later and in these areas.
A lot of those old traditions put a lot of focus on the stars. And that's partly because their culture needed navigation and calendars, and the stars were the way that you organized sort of the framework of the
Yeah.
world back then. I've never been that focused on the star aspect of it myself. How do you think about the relationship between shamanic cultures and heavenly bodies, let's say?
I don't actually know too much about the connection between the heavenly bodies and shamanism. I know that in particular cultures, for instance, the um, the Great Bear, for instance, is of great importance, but that's about it, really, that I've looked into it.
Yeah, I'm curious whether, and I don't know, whether there's a distinct difference in flavor between the shamanism that focuses very much on the biosphere and the shamanism that also opens up to sort of cosmic ranges of experience. When you what do you think's the neatest thing about the Bon tradition? What's drawing you towards Bon?
What's been drawing me towards Bon really is to try to understand Windhorse deeper from the shamanic perspective deeper, and then I'm also interested in to see the overlap between Windhorse and Indo-European ideas regarding figures such as Pegasus and the chariot and soul flight. But yeah, I think I should also soon go for.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
My only other question is sort of what's next for you personally, right? You've done a bunch of healing work. What's your next internal step in shamanism? Where are you going next?
Within shamanism, where am I going next? I guess just to well, I guess like just continue to, I guess, build the relationship with the spirits, and to actually try to, I guess, bring, I guess, in a true Indo-European sense, try to bring the experience towards other people, to reconnect them back to nature, and to I guess try to work on for people to understand this symbolic lens. It's really one of the big things that I focus on, next to the connection to nature, for sure, a deep one.
Well, fantastic. This has been great.
Yeah.
Thanks for exploring all these really fascinating themes with us, Robin, and be well.
Yes. Thank you.